My brother left a sealed box on my doorstep with just one warning: don't make a scene. Then he climbed back into his truck and drove away without looking back. For a few seconds, I simply stood there in the cold morning air, staring at the neat black tape wrapped around the cardboard like it was holding something dangerous together. Maybe it was. My hands shook as I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. There was no return address, no note. Just my name written in my brother's handwriting. Inside was a stack of photographs, a flash drive, and a single silver wedding cufflink. My husband's cufflink. The photographs hit the floor one by one as my fingers went numb. Hotel lobbies, parking garages, a beach house I'd never seen before. And in every frame, my husband wasn't alone. Neither was the woman beside him a stranger to me. She was my brother's wife. At the bottom of the box sat one final envelope containing copies of bank transfers made from our joint account to an account bearing her name. My legs almost gave out. Trembling, I dialed 911. 7 minutes later, my husband walked through the front door, saw 3 officers standing in our living room, and his face drained of color. He looked at the open box, then at me. Then he whispered, "Please don't tell me." He really went through with it. My name is Elena Harper, and for most of my life, I was the person everyone relied on and somehow overlooked at the same time. My younger brother Daniel was the loud one, charming, funny, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new friends and 3 dinner invitations. I was the opposite. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed things people thought nobody noticed. Growing up, our parents used to joke that Daniel could sell water to a drowning man, while I could probably tell you exactly why the man fell into the ocean in the first place. It was meant as a compliment. Somehow it never felt like one. When Daniel introduced us to his future wife, Claire, I was the first person she called when wedding plans became overwhelming. When family drama exploded, or when she simply needed someone to listen without judging. When I married my husband, Michael, 2 years later, Daniel stood beside him as his best man. The 4 of us became one of those families people envied from the outside. Holiday trips, birthday dinners, Sunday barbecues, shared house keys, shared trust. Looking back, trust was probably the most expensive thing I ever owned. There were signs, of course. Missed calls that were returned hours later. Private jokes I wasn't part of. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Each moment was small enough to dismiss and easy enough to forgive. So I did. Because when you spend your entire life being the reasonable one, people begin expecting your forgiveness before they've even earned it. And eventually, you begin expecting it from yourself. That was my mistake. The people who underestimate the quiet person often forget one thing. Quiet people hear everything. The first time I felt something shift, it was so small I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. We were having dinner at Daniel and Claire's house when Michael excused himself to help clear the table. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. When I walked into the kitchen, I found the 3 of them standing unusually close near the counter. Their conversation stopped the moment I entered. Not faded, stopped. Claire immediately reached for a stack of plates she hadn't been touching seconds earlier. Daniel suddenly remembered the drinks in the refrigerator. Michael smiled and asked if I needed anything. I remember standing there with an empty serving bowl in my hands, feeling as though I had interrupted something without knowing what it was. After that, I started noticing the spaces between moments. Michael began locking his phone for the first time in 8 years. Claire started mentioning conversations with him that I had never heard about. Michael already told me about that. Michael said you were thinking about changing jobs. Michael mentioned your mother's appointment went well. Always harmless. Always reasonable. Always one step too familiar. Daniel noticed it too. I could see it in the extra second he held his smile whenever. Michael and Claire shared one of their private jokes. I could hear it in the pause before he answered questions that should have come easily. Once during a family barbecue, I caught him watching them through the kitchen window while everyone else laughed in the garden. Not angry, not surprised, just tired, as though he had been carrying a suspicion for so long that it had become heavy. The strangest part was Michael's kindness toward me during those months. Flowers for no occasion. Coffee waiting beside my laptop every morning. Gentleness wrapped around distance. Guilt often arrives disguised as generosity. And denial is remarkably easy when accepting the truth means destroying the shape of your entire life. so I stayed quiet. Apparently, Daniel had been quiet too. The difference was that my brother had stopped confusing silence with blindness. After the officers arrived, no one said much at first. One of them quietly examined the photographs, while another looked through the bank records and the files stored on the flash drive. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking clock above the fireplace. Michael stood near the doorway, staring at the open box as if it might disappear if he looked long enough. Finally, one of the officers asked a simple question. "Ma'am, what would you like us to do?" Not what had happened. Not what they thought. What would I like to do? For the first time that morning, I looked directly at my husband. Not at the man I married. Not at the life we had built. Just at the person standing in front of me. And suddenly, something became painfully clear. The affair wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It was the assumption behind it. The assumption that I would never notice, that I would explain away every inconsistency, forgive every absence, and protect everyone's comfort at the expense of my own truth. They hadn't hidden it because they were careful. They had hidden it because they believed I was predictable, quiet, safe, convenient. I thanked the officers for coming and told them I wasn't filing a report. Not yet. Because for the first time in months, I understood something my brother had already learned. Some truths don't need to be shouted to change everything. They only need to be placed in the right hands and allowed to speak for themselves. I didn't confront Michael that day. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. And I didn't tell him what Daniel had left in the box. Instead, I watched. For 3 weeks, I lived beside my husband, the way an archivist studies old documents with patience, distance, and attention to detail. Patterns emerged quickly. Late meetings always happened on Thursdays. Business trips were never booked through his company's travel department. The same unfamiliar number appeared on our phone records dozens of times each month. I stopped reacting and started documenting. Dates. Transactions. Messages that appeared briefly on a lock screen before disappearing forever. Receipts forgotten in jacket pockets. Parking tickets from places he had never mentioned visiting. Facts have a remarkable advantage over emotions. They don't change under pressure. Before marriage, I had spent 9 years working as a corporate compliance analyst for a financial firm. My job was simple in theory and complicated in practice. Follow paper trails, identify inconsistencies, and recognize patterns people hoped nobody would connect. The skills transferred surprisingly well to real life. I met quietly with an attorney recommended by a former colleague and learned exactly where I stood legally before making a single move. Joint assets, property rights, financial disclosures, timelines. The goal wasn't punishment. The goal was accuracy. People make mistakes when they act while wounded. I intended to act while informed. Meanwhile, Daniel remained silent. No calls. No explanations. Just the box and the warning not to make a scene. For the first time, I understood what he had really meant. He wasn't protecting Michael. He wasn't protecting Claire. He was protecting me from the one mistake that would have allowed them to rewrite the story later. Anger fades. Evidence doesn't. By the time Michael finally realized something had changed, every document was copied, every account reviewed, and every decision already made. The conversation itself would be the last step, not the first. I chose a Sunday evening, the kind of evening that used to belong to routines. Dinner dishes drying beside the sink. The low hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight fading slowly through the living room windows. Michael looked up from his laptop when I placed a manila folder on the coffee table between us. He glanced at it, then at me. "What's this?" "Everything," I said. Inside were copies of bank transfers, hotel receipts, travel records, and a timeline that stretched back nearly 18 months. No accusations. No dramatic notes written in the margins. Just dates, numbers, and facts arranged in chronological order. The silence lasted longer than any argument ever could have. His eyes moved from page to page, then back to the beginning, then forward again as if searching for an error that wasn't there. Finally, he whispered, "How long have you known?" "Long enough?" "Not long enough to stop it. Long enough to understand it." He sank into the chair opposite me, suddenly looking older than he had that morning. "What happens now?" I slid a second folder across the table. The separation agreement, already reviewed. Already signed. Already filed with my attorney. For the first time since walking through that door weeks earlier, Michael looked genuinely afraid. Not of losing the marriage, of losing control of the version of events he had planned to tell. There would be no confusion later, no misunderstandings, no stories about growing apart or mutual decisions. The timeline spoke clearly enough on its own. Across town, Daniel had already moved out. Claire was facing the same evidence, the same silence, and the same unavoidable facts. No public humiliation followed. No shouting. No revenge speeches. Just consequences arriving quietly at the addresses where they belonged. As Michael sat alone with the papers spread across the table, I picked up my keys and walked toward the door. Behind me, he finally spoke. "You never even raised your voice." I paused for a moment before answering. "No." Then I stepped into the evening air. That was never the part of me you should have been afraid of. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet. People imagine betrayal ending with slammed doors and dramatic exits. But most of the damage happens afterward, in empty rooms, unanswered messages, and traditions that suddenly no longer have a place to live. Michael called several times during the first month. At first, he wanted explanations, then forgiveness. Eventually, he wanted another chance. The order changed. The outcome didn't. Claire's family learned the truth shortly after the separation became public, and the version of events she and Michael had carefully protected collapsed under the weight of dates, records, and timelines that didn't leave much room for interpretation. Daniel and I spoke for the first time 6 weeks later. Neither of us mentioned the box. Neither of us needed to. Some acts of loyalty don't look gentle while they're happening. My brother had chosen truth over comfort, and I understood the cost of that decision better than anyone. The hardest consequence wasn't the loss of my marriage. It was realizing how easily I had accepted being underestimated by the people closest to me. When someone treats your trust as an unlimited resource, eventually they stop noticing its value. That matters because trust isn't what holds relationships together. Respect does. Trust is simply what respect looks like in practice. Once respect disappears, trust is usually just the last thing to find out. A year later, I still keep the silver cufflink. Not because I miss what it represented, because I remember what it revealed. The divorce was finalized quietly. The house was sold. The photographs came down. The routines changed. Some losses arrive all at once. Others leave one ordinary Tuesday morning at a time. Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, like people repairing a bridge after a storm. There were no long speeches about loyalty or sacrifice. Just coffee, phone calls, birthdays remembered. Sometimes love returns through actions long before words catch up. As for Michael and Claire, life moved on for them too. It always does. That was something I had to learn. Closure isn't watching someone else's life fall apart. Closure is realizing your own life no longer depends on whether it does. I returned to work full-time, accepted a promotion I had delayed for years, and moved into a smaller apartment overlooking the river. For the first time in a long time, the silence around me belonged to me. Not loneliness, peace. People often ask how I stayed so calm. The truth is simple. Anger demands an audience. Self-respect doesn't. The box my brother left on my doorstep didn't destroy my life. It ended a version of it that had already been quietly disappearing. Sometimes the kindest thing truth can do is arrive before you waste another year defending a lie. And if this story has a moral, perhaps it's this. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. The quietest person in the room is often the one paying the closest attention. And when respect leaves a relationship, love rarely stays behind for long.